Thank you, Danny and Liz. Now let's look at Romans 1. We want to go to the last part of that chapter, Andy. In Paul's, well, before I start, on our Wednesday nights, generally, Henry does a good job of leading some prayer. So we had prayer with men. Our men's prayer is always very helpful and fruitful. You may have prayer in Sunday school as well, but Ned is back with us, and Betsy is still under the weather, so they've had a difficult beginning to the new year in spite of being able to be out in Las Vegas for a little while. They're back home. You see, continue to pray for Betsy that she'll get feeling better. Joan was here this morning. The doctor has told her that she just has severe arthritis in her knee, and she said that when she hit it, sometimes you bump your knee and you think that that's what caused it. It's she said the doctor said it aggravated it. She said it aggravated her too. But she's getting a little better, and she has received a cortisone shot that's helping some, but she's still walking a little bit wobbly. Livy's supposed to have another test this week, and she's probably headed toward some kind of surgery, heart surgery. So keep her in your prayers. So those are the people that kind of been front and center on the prayer list for us. Keep praying. Encourage people as you can. Tell them, hang in there. You can go. God's going to help you. Ask the Lord to help you. Encourage them. Do what you can to help them too. Well, the book of Romans is about the nuts and bolts of salvation. Paul is headed to Rome. He's never been there before. And we don't know anything much about how the church at Rome was founded, how it got started. But remember that every one of Jesus' first disciples were all Jewish. And all of the apostles were Jewish. And on the day of Pentecost, which was a Jewish holiday, the Holy Spirit fell and the movement began, the explosion of the story of Jesus began to spread throughout the world. In such a brief time for there to be a church in Rome, that meant, as I said this morning, when Stephen was stoned to death and the church began to undergo a very severe persecution, it drove Christians out of Jerusalem. That's what Jesus told them to do anyway. He says, start in Jerusalem, but go to the uttermost part. And they didn't. They just kind of hung around there. They stayed around there having a good time in church. We do. And we want to have a good time in church. We want to enjoy church. We want to have, church ought to have a good time. But church is not that God's against having a good time, but it's just like Peter saying, Lord, let's build 3 tabernacles and just camp out here. You and Elijah and Moses, and Jesus said, oh, we got stuff to do, man. And there's a tendency in every Christian. We want to go to heaven, and we'd like to have heaven right here. And church is never intended to be having such joy and pleasure and celebration and good time. It should never try to be like getting as close to heaven on earth as you possibly can get. I think of church as fellowship and training, and it's about duty and service and worship and those things. But sometimes if we're not entertained, or if we don't come out feeling mentally and spiritually better, we feel like maybe that wasn't a grand service. And a lot of times how we feel, well, not a lot of times, almost all the time, the way you feel can be very deceptive. You can feel good about things that God doesn't feel good at all. Or sometimes there are things that He feels great about and we don't seem to care much about. Feelings. I love to feel good. It's been my birthday all day today. It might be my birthday part of the day tomorrow. I don't know. It all depends. It all depends. And my son called me. Everybody loved me, or claims to love me, was at lunch today, except my son. And I've been getting messages on Facebook and through Messenger all day today saying what a nice guy I am, which just proves that people on Facebook don't have a clue about who you are or what you like. If God hadn't allowed the death of Stephen, they'd all been at church. You know what? You know how often they were having church? What does the book of Acts tell you? Every day. Every day. This is so much fun. We're having church every day and breaking bread from house to house. God said, we got to do something. Jesus said, kill somebody. Okay. And you know, when Stephen died, the persecution started, and it says they were scattered everywhere. If this is really preached, because if you look at Acts 1:8, Danny, this will preach, so kind of keep this and put this in your notebook. Acts 1:8, Jesus said, go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and then to the uttermost. That's Acts 1:8. Acts 1:8. But in Acts 8:1, it says, and the Christians, because of the persecution, were scattered to the utmost part of the world. They were scattered everywhere. So what God was really trying to say, look, it's either Acts 1:8 or Acts 8:1, whichever you want. God's going to have His way. And so that'll preach right there. So look, you either do what Jesus says or do what Jesus says. You know, it's no choice. It's no choice. So, well, they went everywhere. And they went to Rome. The heart of the empire. They're everywhere. It was risen, wasn't it? And there was the Roman centurion. He had one of the disciples there. I can't even remember who it was. It was Nathaniel, wasn't it? Nathaniel. This is Nathaniel. And he said, I want you to tell me where Jesus' followers are. Tell me. And he says, okay. He said, okay. He looked around like that, and he got up out of his chair, and he walked over to the centurion. He leaned over the centurion, put his ear. He said, they're everywhere. You know, that really wasn't the answer he was looking for. But that was the truth. He said, they're everywhere. And they scattered. And it was because of death and pain and hurt and sacrifice and blood. And it's a part of God's equation. I wonder if the devil's kind of wised up a little bit. Maybe he has. I think maybe he has. I don't know. Somebody rear back like they want to slap a Christian, and the devil's like, hey, don't hit him, man. What's wrong with you? Every time you hit one of them, man, just God splashes out on everybody. Now, here in Romans 1, Paul does the grocery list of sin. He says, I want to talk to you about how I want to explain to you about how salvation through Jesus Christ works. And so, well, he goes into the nuts and bolts about redemption and about justification and grace and all that stuff. And so, but it starts with sin. Now, I was looking at this. We're going to look at this, and the sin that he describes here in Romans chapter 1 doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason as far as there's no theme. They don't, like one doesn't lead to another. Doesn't seem to be a list of progressively worse or less evil sins. They don't seem to be, there are sins about what you think and what you feel and what you do and who you associate with, how you behave. And, just let's look at a hodgepodge, and let's look right here. Look at verse 29. Being filled with all unrighteousness. Now he's going to explain to him later on about what it means to be righteous. And he's thinking unrighteousness, and he knows in his mind what preachers think. They're saying, what's unrighteousness? And we think of it as a Christian term, or as a theological term, or as a religious term, and he just says things that aren't right. Things that aren't right. And we talked about last Sunday night that the things that are not right are simply not right. We talked about clean and unclean, or whether it was approved or unapproved. It all boils down to what does God think about that? Not what you and I think about it. We can take any sin in the world and we can begin to say, I don't believe that would be all that bad. It'd be kind of like eating an apple. There's nothing wrong with eating an apple. We can take any sin you can imagine. It's just amazing what people can think about it. And how far we can go to say, this is perfectly fine. This is perfectly fine. We can put step by step and name why this is okay. We can't treat sin that way. So he says, things that are wrong. Fornication. That's any kind of sexual impurity or immorality. Anything that's not sexually right. Wickedness. Wickedness? Wickedness. Boy, you see, that just kind of like covers the whole, almost anything you could think of that sin is wicked. Covetousness, that's when you want other people's stuff. Maliciousness. When that's when you're doing something just simply for malice, just to hurt somebody. You're just mean. You're just doing that to be mean. Full of envy. Talk about envy this morning, looking at rich people and hate them because they have money and we don't. Now look, he said envy, murder. Now listen, I'm going to write a book one of these days called Was Jesus Kidding? And if you look at the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus was talking to people who had probably never murdered anybody. Well, maybe one of his disciples, Simon the Zealot, was probably a cutthroat. He's a zealot. He's a political terrorist. Simon the Zealot, one of Jesus' apostles. But Jesus got on Sermon on the Mount, he says, I want to talk to these people about their sin and about their lostness. But they start out by thinking, I've never killed anybody. I'm a pretty good guy. So Jesus said, you know what? I'm still getting birthday wishes. Can y'all hear that? That's aggravating. Oh, we love you. You're such a nice guy. Let's put the dinging off for right now. Jesus said, if you're ever angry at someone without a cause, without a just cause, what did he say, Randy?
He said that you would be guilty of murder.
That's right. You're guilty of murder. You ever been angry with someone for no reason at all? For no good reason? We all got a reason. He said what he's talking about is a valid, legal, scriptural reason. If you've ever been angry, just angry at him. He says you're guilty. He says you're on your way to hell. He says hell of fire. You know, Jesus talked about hell more than anybody in the whole world ever has. I was watching Joan of Arcadia one time and they said, you know, that God in the Old Testament is kind of scary, but the God in the New Testament, Jesus, he's okay. Jesus talked more about hell. And, man, hell is about a scary thing that you can think about. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild. I heard a comedian one time and he says, you know, somebody was mistreating me and bad-mouthed me and everything, and I started to just do something ugly to him, and all of a sudden I thought, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? He said, so I set him on fire and sent him to hell. You know, so you just, that's what Jesus would do. Jesus was all about hell and heaven. All of a sudden, with just one swipe, I'm sure some of those really highbrow Pharisees said, is he kidding? Is he kidding? He's just kidding, ain't he? No, Jesus was dead serious. Now, I'm going to write a book about the Sermon on the Mount. Was he just kidding? Was he just kidding when he said, if you've been angry at someone without a cause? And then he said, if you've ever looked at a woman and say, well, that's fine right there. You know, he says, no, you've committed adultery.
In your heart.
That's right. Well, he was just exaggerating. He was just making a point. He was just, either he meant it or he didn't. You probably don't think of yourself, I don't know, I'm not going to say it that way. You may or may not think of yourself as a murderer or someone who is immoral. But if Jesus wasn't kidding in the Sermon on the Mount, most of us are. I mean, I remember when Jimmy Carter was president. Remember when we did that stupid Playboy interview? He did an interview for Playboy, kind of bad political. He said, he wrote the book called Born Again, and then someone said, why don't you do an interview with Playboy? We know that people only read it, why? For the articles. for the articles. They don't care about the pictures. And then somebody else said, it's got articles. But, you know, it's and Jimmy Carter said, you know, I've looked at a woman every once in a while with lust in my heart. Man, the press went nuts. Evidently, they didn't know he was a Democrat or they left him alone. But anyway, it was a different day and age. He wished he'd never done that interview, for one thing, that he told people that didn't understand. I think all men could possibly say. I've always told my daughter, I said, hon, if you knew what boys were thinking about you, you'd be slapping their face every minute. If you knew what boys were thinking. Girls never did believe us when we told them that boys were only thinking of one thing. They didn't know this. But when they got a little bit older, they said, yeah, I know what it is now. It's taking a nap. Yeah, no. Well, murder. You look at this list and say, well, at least I'm not a murderer. Oh, you are if Jesus wasn't kidding. Debate. That means just tossing and bandying back a disagreement just like it was a game or like it was a competition. Deceit. Malignity. I have never found anything really malignant. You don't know what a malignancy is, don't you? Cancer. I don't know how that would fit into it's sin. You know, it's something that just eats away at something and grows and it's bad and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Whisperers. Backbiters, other people that criticize people behind their back. Haters of God. They're spiteful. They do things just to see what you'll do. They do things just to tick you off. Proud. Be prideful. Boasters, bragging. Inventors of evil things. They're making up stuff. He said, you know, I'm worried here that I'm not getting all these sin words. Maybe there are people out there that are just sitting around, they're just making up stuff. He said, inventors of evil things. And then the worst ones of all, disobedient to parents. You gotta be kidding. Without understanding is on God's blacklist. Covenant breakers. People, deal breakers. People don't keep they sign a piece of paper. You know what? Every time I hear this, I think of people that are in finance. You know, I listen to a lot of talk radio. And there's a commercial that comes on about every 15 minutes that says, have you been fooled by your credit card company? Have they fooled you into thinking that you got to pay all of that back? I'm thinking, what? Have they tricked you into thinking that you got to pay off? You don't have to pay all that back. Do you know what they mean? People in Congress have actually written laws that if you just make a good case, why my toe hurts and I can't pay, I went to Walmart and I maxed my credit card out, but I can't pay it all back. There are laws actually that say that you don't have to pay it all back. They've got to figure out something. Your credit card company has to give you a figure that they'll take if you're threatening that you're not going to pay any of it. Well, that ain't nothing but stealing. Yeah. If you borrowed something from somebody and you agreed to a certain interest rate, you made a covenant, you made a contract. And when they're telling you, when they're saying, hey, you got to pay all that back, they're not trying to fool you. They're telling you, I know it's hard and it's tough, and it was a lot easier spending it than it is paying it back. But we're not trying to trick you, or we're not mistreating you by telling you got to pay it all back. Without natural affection, implacable. That means not trustworthy. That doesn't mean they have bad teeth. Unmerciful. Unmerciful. All right. Now, let me size this up and get I'm going to wrap up chapter 1 right here. He's saying something right here. And it seems like the whole point is just to make you speechless, just knock you out, just hit you between the eyes. Oh, man. Because it's obvious. He said, give me just a minute here. I'm going to make a list of really, really bad people. And then I look at it and say, I think I'm on that list. I'm pretty sure I'm on that list a lot of times. I hope he doesn't ask for us to use a check mark and circle the ones that we can claim as our own. I look at there and I say, well, I'm in there a lot. And not just something I do every day, every minute, with every breath, but I'm 63 years old. I've covered a lot of this territory. And I've done a lot of those things that I'm pretty sure Jesus was not kidding about. There's like a hallmark verse. I'm going to test you. Here you're being tested. There's a hallmark. Paul takes chapter 1, this list right here, with what I just said in like what I feel like is interpretation. It's one of the most important verses in the first part of Romans. And we all know it, and we all gravitate to it, and we're all familiar with it, and we may not know exactly where to find it in Romans, but we know that this is what the Bible, he kind of puts it in one sentence, and what does he say? For all have sinned. Very good, you get a blue star. He says, for all have sinned, and that's really all he's saying right there. Not all. I mean, he's saying he's going all the way around the barn twice, but that's, when he gets done with this list right here, you're supposed to say, well, preacher, if that's right, if what you're saying is true, it's from God, then all have sinned. We've all sinned. Also, I found out a verse that I memorized. There's a little bit of short verse. That's Romans 3:23. Chapter 3, verse 20. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Chapter 3, verse 10 says, there is none righteous.
No, not one.
No, not one. No. You think that if a man of God wrote through the inspiration of the Spirit, I said there's none righteous. There's none righteous. Then he says, no. You mean, not one. And he feels like he's got to keep driving that nail into the board. You know, say, no, man, not even one. Not even one? No, not a nary a one, we'd say here in Alabama. Nary. N-A-R-E, nary. Nary a one. Not one. Romans 3:10. So he's laying some foundation work. Okay, and I went with this, and I said, okay, now what? He started out this tirade. He's just mentioning these by name. But he started out, he spent several verses talking about people who worshiped idols. And then he started saying, men who lay with women as with men, as with women. Men who lay with men as with women, and women who lay with women as with men, I think. And he goes several verses of that, I think. And then he goes, he's just hitting them one name by name. I said, that doesn't, why is he doing that? Why did he say about making idols, and they could see in nature, and yet they worshipped the created thing more than the creature more than the creator? And then homosexuality. And then I put myself in his place. He's never been to Rome. But he knows a lot of people who have. He's going to write this letter. You know what I think he did? I think he always had an entourage with him and people who worked with him, and I think he bounced a lot. And even though the Holy Spirit's leading him, these things come from his thoughts and his heart, from his own spirit. God's using all that in the inspiration process. And he says, he may have asked Luke. He said, look here, Luke. I got me a list of really nasty things, but I want to give the impression that everybody has sinned. And then I think Luke said, what? So you got me there, you hit me. Like a pretty good inclusive list, though. I don't think you missed anything. But then Paul said, I'm headed to Rome. Are there any sins in Rome that might just really be bad sins, or maybe things that we don't see every day around here in Jerusalem? Now, we know from reading the Old Testament that in Israel's past there have been times when they worshipped idols. But in the New Testament era, they didn't. Paul didn't. There weren't any idols. They didn't worship Ashtaroth or Baal in Israel during Paul's time. But as you rode your chariot or whatever, or walked through the streets of Rome, what do you see?
assign the different temples to different gods.
Yeah, statues everywhere in temples. All right, now, I don't know how much you've studied about Roman history or not, but do you know what one of the most prevalent social activities was? It was homosexuality. Gay people would be offended by this, but I don't mind offending people. That's what the nature of the gospel is. It's an offense. That's scandalous. It was rampant. It was very, very, very common, very popular. You see, in kind of a cosmopolitan, metropolitan area, it seems to be where homosexuality seems to find a place where it can settle and grow and thrive. And in Rome, it had gotten to a place where people had accepted it as an alternate lifestyle. It's just another way, and many people considered themselves to be bisexual or homosexual. So I believe the reason he spent so much time on those two particular sins is because, right at the very first two things that he mentioned, was because these were sins that the Romans needed to know that they were being called out to. That here are two things that are just a part of your everyday life. They're a part of what you see and what you do. They're a part of the way you were raised, and you accept it and you don't even think about it. But he says, I need to let you know, you particularly, that they're sin. And everyone has sinned. So I believe that's the way the chapter kind of falls out. He jumps into chapter 2 by saying, because I do believe that Jewish Christians did take the gospel to Rome. But then it became the kind of church that Paul was planting, where, whenever Paul went into a town in his travels, he always went to the synagogue first. And he'd preach and they'd kick him out. But then some of the people in the synagogue would follow him out the door and say, we want to hear some more of this. And Paul says, well, I'm going to be talking to all the Gentiles in town. If you want to hear more about Jesus, then just follow me around. That's all I talk about. And so eventually in Corinth, in Ephesus, places like that, wherever he started a church, it would be Jewish, came out of the synagogue. And so that's probably what happened to some extent, probably through Priscilla and Aquila, or through Apollos. They went to the synagogue in Rome, and there's no doubt there's a synagogue there. But then Paul in Romans chapter 2 starts saying, being Jewish, one of the chosen people of God, not going to do you any good with what I'm about to tell you about. And he saw being very religious. The Jewish people are the most religious people in the world. They even outdid the Romans. But there was still, the reason he's doing this also is that in the first chapter of Romans, he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for this is the power of God and salvation to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Which is a very strange way of saying that. He doesn't say to the Jew first and then next to the Greek. To the Jew first and also to the Greek. Because there was usually not more than a day or two's difference between when Paul was talking only to Jews and when he was talking to Jews and Gentiles. So it's Jews first. But he uses the phrase to the Jews first and also to the Greeks 2 times in chapter 2. And so he wants to say, look, Jewish people feel like that they haven't done any of these things. And he talked to them in chapter 2. He says, let me tell you who the Jewish people are about the Jewish religion. So they're always preaching to everybody about obeying God and keeping the law. And he says, they have never obeyed God and kept the law. And he says, I just want to give you a heads up on that. That what I'm talking about in Romans as salvation is, I'm not writing this letter to give you, saying, here are God's new set of rules that you have to obey to be a Christian or to get to heaven or to be a saved person. He says, that is no good. That's not going to get you. That's not what being right with God is about. It's not about undoing these things or offering sacrifices to pay for these things or promising that you're never going to do these things again. It's by understanding that when Jesus was nailed to the cross, he paid for all these things and he did away with them. Sin is just gone. In the reckoning in the heart and the mind of God, sin is gone. Sin is gone. He's dealt with it. It's done. And the only thing that matters is, do you have a relationship with Jesus? Because that's the only thing that will do away with all of this, past, present, future. So that's what he's doing. All right?